Hi everyone, Kate here for my March wrap up. So I think for many of us that a fair amount of March was going to be a struggle to be reading. I just had a really hard time focusing on anything. I finally was able to sort of get back in the reading groove by picking up a mystery, and I wish I had just done it sooner because I kind of spent about 2 weeks in there just kind of not really knowing what to read, what to pick up next. And it's obviously fine if you have times that you're not reading as much, but just reading kind of makes everything better for me and is a nice distraction. So I will tell you about the books that I read. It was middle grade March, and I started off on such a roll, and I still did read a lot of middle grade in the month. So that was really fun. And I'm hoping, just to keep the middle grade going throughout the year because I love it so much. But as always, I get kind of distracted with other reading projects, which is fine. So the first book that I completed was Raymie Nightingale by Kate DiCamillo. And this is the first in her Three Rancheros series. And I really enjoyed this. It's got the quirky characters that Kate DiCamillo has. It's set in a small southern town, and there's a lot of heart to it, and you're really getting to know these characters and their motivations and their history and all of that. And so you're in each book, you're going to follow a different out of these three girls. And so Raymie Nightingale is the first character you're following, and you get to meet the other two girls that will be in the subsequent two books. But you meet them there, and I really liked that. Then I read Tebbits by Beverly Cleary. I did read a fair amount of Beverly Cleary this month, and it was a lot of fun to read so much. And I really liked this. It's just very Beverly Cleary. It's this little town, and just the kids always getting into scrapes. There's a lot of humor. There's some laugh out loud moments. And Ellen in the beginning is so embarrassed because she's wearing long underwear. And so then it sort of makes her have a bond with another girl whose mother forces her to wear long underwear. So yeah, just a funny, sweet, quick, easy read. Next, I read a graphic novel called Deafo. This is by Cece Bell, and this is an own voices type graphic novel about a young girl and her experience growing up being hearing impaired. And I really enjoyed this book. It was just a really great window into looking what it's like to grow up hearing impaired, and things like people just thinking if they yell that she'll be able to understand what they're saying better, and kind of the dilemmas that she has going to a sleepover when people want to talk with the lights off. So she can read lips very well, and then having a hearing aid really helps her to hear most of what is being said to her. And then also she has this really fun alter ego called Deafo, who's a superhero. And so I like that it takes this really serious topic, it lets you in on kind of what it's like to experience that, and then it kind of shows you some humor in there, and also kind of this coping mechanism of Deafo. It's a really special book. It won the Newbery, so I wasn't surprised that it did. Then I read Enchanted by Gail, Carson, Levine. This is a reread for me. I love this book. It's a Cinderella retelling. It might be my favorite one. It has so many funny characters. Ella is blessed by a fairy at the very beginning with a gift of obedience, but it's obedience to an extreme fault, where if anyone tells her to do anything, that she has to do it. She's filled with this intense physical pain if she doesn't obey, and she's filled with it until she does it. And people will just say passing comments, like if she accidentally bumps into someone, oh, go bump into someone else, a grown-up will say, and then she'll literally have to go bump into someone else. And then throw into the midst of this, she's trying to figure out how to break this. She's calling it a curse. And also she has some romance with the prince, Charmant, or Char for short, and it's just a really wonderfully written story, and it has so much just agency that Ella is given in it, and I just love her as a character. She's so strong, and there's fun humor, and it's got a very fun fairy tale feel to it, so it's one of my absolute favorite Cinderella retellings. And then I read Otis Spofford by Beverly Cleary, which is the second in the Ellen Tebbits series, so it's a little duology, and Otis is a boy that she meets in Ellen Tebbits, And then you get to see Otis in this book, and he really is a troublemaker. So there were some really funny things that happened in this one. Then I read Tuesdays at the Castle by Jessica Day George. I had heard a lot about this series and wanted to try it, and it's about a castle that expands on Tuesdays. There's always a new room, and our main character, who I'm going to look up her name because it escapes me, Celie. Celie has this very intimate knowledge of the castle, more than any of her other siblings do. And this is a very adventurous type tale, but it's got some really good characterization in there with Celie and her siblings. And it's really one twist after another, and it was just told in such a wonderful way. I think I gave it 5 stars. I loved it so much, and it was just a really well-written story. So I'm very excited to read the next one, which I think is called Wednesdays at the Tower. So I will most definitely be continuing on with that series. Then I read Thimble Summer by Elizabeth Enright. Elizabeth Enright is the author of the books that I love, Gone Away Lake and Return to Gone Away Lake. And I had never read Thimble Summer, and it's about a little girl and her time growing up on a farm in Wisconsin. It's this sort of little window into her life from when she finds a thimble when she's out playing outside, and she thinks the thimble brings her good luck and all of the wonderful things that happen because of it. But it's written really well. I love Elizabeth Enright's writing and definitely recommend it. It also won the Newbery. And then I finally jumped on the bandwagon and read and loved The War That Saved My Life by Kimberly Brubaker Bradley. Now, don't at me, but I kind of think World War II historical fiction is oversaturated. And so anytime, honestly, that I hear something is set in World War II, I'm immediately put off, because I'm like, what new can you do with this? Because I think people love that time period so much, and then they kind of build a story around the time period. Whereas this, I feel, was the reverse, where somebody thought of a great storyline with certain characters, and then she thought, oh, you know what? World War II would be really conducive for this setting. So that's kind of the order I think you should do historical fiction when you're plotting it out. It's a brother and a sister, and they're living with an abusive mother. And then the program to take children out of London and have them go to the countryside during the Blitz is started. And so they go to stay with this woman, and the girl in the sibling duo has a club foot, is what it would have been called. And it's just about how she has always looked at herself as, or always been looked at as, lesser than because of that disability that she has. And it's this really, it's kind of like, I'd say, almost a more realistic Anne of Green Gables. I don't think Anne of Green Gables is necessarily unrealistic, but it just felt very, like the characters felt very real, and you're seeing the real trauma that they're recovering from living with the mother that they had. And I highly, highly recommend it. So I definitely want to read The War I Finally Won. And yeah, I loved the characters in this a lot. Next is another one that's a new favorite, and that is Each Little Bird That Sings by Deborah Wiles. And Deborah Wiles is an author I heard about on the Read Aloud Revival podcast. And this is about Comfort Snowberger, whose family runs a funeral home. And she writes the obituary column in this town, and this really small town in Mississippi. And so it felt very nostalgic for me. Some of the pop culture things that were referenced and locations felt so familiar. So this was a very cozy read for me. But this is a middle grade that really treaded the line wonderfully, where it had sober things, but it had a lot of heart and it had a lot of humor. It had heartbreaking, but also heart-healing times within this book. And it was a really, I think, if you know any child that unfortunately is grieving, I think this is a great book to hand to them, because it deals with death so tactfully. And it's something that in the West, we're not comfortable talking about a lot, even though one day all of us will die, you know, whether it's tomorrow or in 50 years, it's going to happen. And we just a lot of times live like we're unaware of that. And so I really just loved this book. Next, a very 3-star read was The Dragon with a Chocolate Heart by Stephanie Burgis. The concept is really cool. It's about a dragon who gets tricked by a food mage or food magician into eating some food that transforms them into a human, and kind of what she makes of her life after she's been turned into a human. And there's a lot to do with chocolate, so I definitely drank some hot chocolate while reading this, and it was fine. You know, it was adequate, but it was just nothing to really blow me away. So I think if the writing had been superb, it could have definitely been bumped up a star or two. But since it was just very average writing, it was just a very average read. Then Emily's Runaway Imagination, another Beverly Cleary. Really enjoyed this. Emily gets herself into lots of scrapes because of her runaway imagination. And in this book, there is a library that opens in the town. So there is a lot of book love happening. And it made me want to read Black Beauty, because Black Beauty is referenced a lot in this book. And I definitely recommend this if you like Beverly Cleary. I would definitely read this. And also, what I was shocked and pleased to see is there is a Chinese immigrant in this book, and he's portrayed very positively and not caricatured, and it's a really neat storyline, and I was really surprised, since it was written in the 50s, to see that. Then we have The Wolves of Willoughby Chase by Joan Aiken. This to me is like Daphne du Maurier for middle graders. For middle grade reading, and it was so well written and atmospheric. It's about these two girls, and they're staying at one of the girls' houses, and the parents of this girl leave. They have to go on a trip, and as soon as they go on a trip, sinister things really start to happen. And so you do feel extra on edge and, you know, urgent about things, because it's these little girls on their own, but they're such wonderful characters, and it really keeps you guessing until the end what's going to happen. And it's a more modern classic. I think it was written in the 70s, but I really enjoyed that one. And then another one, I did have a lot of middle grade that I really enjoyed, was Hattie Big Sky by Kirby Larson. This is a historical fiction that's set during World War I, and it's in South Dakota. And this young girl who's an orphan, or she's a teen rather, I think she's 16 or 14. Anyhow, she has inherited a plot of land in South Dakota. She's inherited a claim, and if she can, you know, make a certain amount of money by a certain amount of time, or, you know, do something with the claim that meet the requirements, then she can keep it. And so it's just her journal of her struggles while she's there. So writing in her journal and also writing letters, and there's some narration. It had some really interesting characters. It felt really a great way to know what was it like to live on a farm then, and I definitely recommend that one. Then we have The Secret Garden. And I hosted the March into the Secret Garden read along, and unfortunately, I am really bummed that I reread this. So if you don't want to be spoiled for The Secret Garden, mute it for a couple minutes. I'm going to hold up, that's what I'll help you out. I'm going to hold up a picture of The Secret Garden the whole time I'm talking about it, and then I'll put it down when I'm done. Okay, so for those of you that have read The Secret Garden, I did not realize that I would be triggered. And like, I feel silly using that word because it's overused, but it's really applicable to my experience with this. But reading The Secret Garden, I knew going in that Frances Hodgson Burnett was Christian Scientist, which it is a cult, and they believe that illness, physical illness, is an illusion, and if you just will it, you can make it go away. And Frances Hodgson Burnett herself, this worked for her. She had a chronic illness and it went away. So I didn't think about this going in having a chronic illness myself. And Colin, that whole plot line just really bothered me so much, whereas he has this chronic illness, but he believes in the magic. It's like he goes into the garden, I believe in the magic, and poof, you know, magically he's healed, as if, you know, if you have a chronic illness, if you really, really want it enough, you can make it go away. So if your chronic illness is staying, then you obviously haven't tried hard enough. That's the message that sends. And so it really just struck a nerve with me, and I'm so sad because I considered The Secret Garden one of my favorite books, and it just really put a pall on the experience. And so that is the danger sometimes with a reread, is it doesn't live up to the experience. So I'm very sad that it just got under my skin so much, but it is what it is, you know? So that was my experience rereading The Secret Garden. Okay, moving on. The next was another graphic novel, and that was Stargazing by Jen Wang. This was a 3-star read. It's a graphic novel about a Chinese American and her friend who moves in, is renting part of their house that's an apartment, and their friendship. And yeah, just 3 stars. It was a fun, quick read. Then one of the books that actually I found very comforting when all of the shutdown from coronavirus stuff happened was The Night Diary. And this takes place during the partition of Pakistan and India. And there is a family that is Hindu, and they are living in what will now become Pakistan. So they have to travel. They have to leave Pakistan because it won't be safe for them to live there anymore. And they have to go back to what is, you know, now being partitioned as India. And it felt very comforting to think, you know what, if people lived through this and could be resilient, then surely this just having to stay at home on my part, I can do that, because things could be so much worse. You know, there are people who are very ill right now, and this is just such a hard time for a lot of people, and a lot harder. So me just staying at home, it really just puts it in perspective. You know, that's all I have to do. And so it was a very comforting read. Then I read The Mouse and the Motorcycle, another Beverly Cleary. I think I unfortunately read a little bit too much Beverly Cleary at this point. I think I gave The Mouse and the Motorcycle 3 stars. I wasn't that interested in any of the characters. It is about this little mouse named Ralph, and he has a motorcycle, and he gets to drive it around the hotel that his family lives in. And it was fine. My 5-year-old loved it so much. He listened to the audiobook, and I listened to it with him. Then we have From Norvelt to Nowhere by Jack Gantos. The first one in this series is called Dead End in Norvelt. And so From Norvelt to Nowhere is where the main character, Jack, is he goes off with his friend. Oh, I hope it has her name here. Mrs. Glickman? I think that might be her name. But it's this very zany adventure they go on together. And it was, it was very harebrained, but it's very Jack Gantos. If you like quirky, zany humor, you should check out Jack Gantos's books. So I definitely want to read more by him. It wasn't as good as Dead End in Norvelt because it felt a little bit meandering. Didn't quite know what it wanted to do. Then I read Mrs. Frisby and the Rats of Nimh by Robert C. O'Brien. And this, unfortunately, was a case of the book about the wrong thing. So in the beginning of the book, we find Mrs. Frisby, whose son has a fever, and she's traveling to go to this, and she's a mouse, and she's scurrying around trying to get to this doctor, and he tells her what she needs to do to take care of her son. And then she's worried that when they have to move from where they live, and they move every summer to by the river, that it's going to be too cold for him at first because they're moving mid-spring. And so she goes to meet a wise owl, and he says, oh, you need to go talk to these rats and they'll tell you what to do. And she goes to meet the rats. And so the first fifth of the book is that. And the last fifth is the rats moving her house so that her son won't get sick. But the 3/5 in the middle is about the rats and their lives they used to live as lab rats. And I was so bored. I was so, I could not be bothered. I did not care. I read this aloud to my 5-year-old. He loved it. I wanted to be done. You just could not interest me. I couldn't care less about how they survived, all of that. I don't know why. It is just not a plot that interests me. And I know a lot of people love that book. It was so well written. And I just so wished it had been about what was in the first fifth of the book and the last fifth of the book. It's my same struggle with The Tenant of Wildfell Hall. I love the very beginning and the very end of it, but the middle just bores me to tears. Then we have The Rat Prince, another rodent book by Bridget Hodder. And this is a Cinderella retelling. And I will talk about it in my next Cinderella Chronicles video. And I will wrap it up and tell you what I thought about it. Then I read out loud, another read aloud, Pippi Goes on Board by Astrid Lindgren. And I've really enjoyed this. I love the Pippi books. I love the humor that they have. There's so many just funny, quirky things like, how did Astrid Lindgren come up with this? And they're just such fun reads, and I definitely recommend them. And then the mystery that kind of really, like, I don't know why I do this thing, and I talked about this in a catch-up a couple weeks ago, where I feel like I can't treat myself to those treaty reads. You know, I have all of these reading goals, and then what happens is I just don't read as much, and so just forget it. Like, I'm reading for leisure, trying to do improving reading, trying to do those classics and my reading goals, but also just having fun. And so I don't know why I waited so long to read another mystery in the year. I think I read one maybe earlier in the year, but it just really just spurs on my reading and just really gets me excited. And then I'm happy to read those other books that aren't mysteries more, because it just really energizes my reading life. So I read Leaving Everything Most Loved. This is the 10th Maisie Dobbs book by Jacqueline Winspear, and this series to me is just so, it's an ideal mystery series, and there's not much I can say about this one because, you know, it's so late in the series, but this does involve kind of clashing cultures. There are several Indian immigrants living in London, and the case involves one of the young Indian women who is murdered. And so Maisie gets to learn a lot more about what the experience of, you know, Indian expats living in England at the time is like. And it's really, really fascinating. Maisie has some big decisions to make in her life, and the series is so good. I always need a little while to recover emotionally before I move on to the next one. It's so good. It's so good. And then lastly, Doris and I, we are on a roll. We have read The Knife of Dreams by Robert Jordan, the 11th Wheel of Time book. And this was definitely quite a move up from the book 10 because really nothing happens in book 10. Like, barely anything happens, and there was so much happening in book 11. My one complaint, though, is that Robert Jordan put the climax 75% of the way through, and then it really felt fairly meandering for the rest of it. But I still love these characters so much. Obviously, I do, because I've read through 11 books now. Now, this was the last one that Robert Jordan wrote before he died. The next 3 are by Brandon Sanderson, and I have heard from multiple people they are a lot easier to keep going with, to feel hooked by. The action is more in there, and I really, really want that, because the later, like the last, I'd say almost 5 Wheel of Time books, it has just felt so politics heavy, whereas the first several books felt so heavy on the action, and I loved that part of it. So I would just love to get to see these characters have the endings that they deserve, and just have this be really, really a fun time reading the next 3. So Doris and I, we are committed to finish it this year. We're going to read the next one in May, take April off. But that is my month of reading. I hope that you're able to find books that work for you now, or just whatever is working for you now, TV or painting, or what else is there? Games, you know, something, puzzles. Yes, so let me know your favorite book that you read in March, if you did have a favorite book in the very, very weird month that was March of 2020. So I will leave it there, and I will be back for another video soon. Have a lovely day.